Hello, and welcome to my city. I've spent the past 24 hours building a city featuring skyscrapers, construction sites, and some absolutely amazing parks. The goal of this city was to build a fight scene for an upcoming video where I would need footage of just a street in the middle of a city. This was 1 hour project, went to 24 hours of building just because I got so caught up in the details. To start off, I laid out the basic shapes and sizes, some of the buildings, as well as how the streets would look. I wanted to go for a very modern city, something you'd find in New York or that really weird town in Wales with the weird name.
Just up the road from Llanfair Pwll Gwyn, gall go get a Quindrobol, Llan Sicilio go. The temperature got to 21 Celsius.
Wow, that's impressive.
The city was going to have a mix of older buildings made from granite and bricks, as well as more modern buildings using concretes and terracottas. This only took around 4 hours, but it started to get really carried away because after I just designed the main street that everything would go down, I built some offshoots to that street. So after designing the main street on camera and just recording all of that, I turned it off, and before I head to bed, I just quickly laid out everything else, and then I headed to bed. And that is where things got carried away. I woke up the next morning, I started off by adding some details you'd find in every little city. Just some benches, street lights, doors, and I apparently thought that cities have a huge amount of mailbox, so there are at least 4 mailboxes for every block, which is awesome. After adding all these mailboxes and other unimportant details to the city, it was time to work on the actual buildings. I wanted to make this feel realistic and incredibly detailed, so each of the buildings took a while. Like, the footage you are watching right now is 80 times the speed of what this took me. This took forever. So I started laying out the first street, going along with a row of houses, a mix of older houses, as well as newer houses, tall buildings, small buildings. And then I decided that things were going so well, I should treat myself to a break. So then I went and got lunch. After lunch, I came back to the project ready to tackle some of the more annoying builds, as when I was laying things out, I built up a completely glass building when outlining the city. Because I liked how much this building looked when I built it, I needed to now fit it into the city, and the way to do that was to add interiors so it didn't look like this hollow shell that made everything else around it look so much nicer, and it just looked like this sad sack of a building. On the next building, I wanted this to be a mainly background building, so it wasn't going to have a huge amount of details, and it was just there to make it look like a real city, which is an excellent excuse for being lazy. I also figured that since I'd put a lot of time into this city, we were 16 hours in at this point, I should promote myself. So I made some really terrible graffiti of the sub button, as well as a lick sign. To make me feel better about these horrible atrocities that I've just built, please subscribe and lick the video. After coming back from lunch, I also forgot to record 2 new buildings that I built, and they actually turned out really cool. And then I went and started working on some of the bigger builds in the city, and I may have made another sign. This one was slightly better though, I'll give myself that. Then, after that, it was time to work on the first offshoot, totally unnecessary road to make the city feel more expansive and like a real city. For this first build, off to the side, I made it feel more worn down, but I also just want to say that I hate minecarts right now. I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how to position them so they could have a flower pot above them and make them look really cool, like a detail I'd found online, but I just could not get them to work, and I am still mad about that. Next, I moved on to another window building, meaning I would have to add interiors for this one as well. The build was supposed to be a bank. It had a pretty cool interior. Next, I made another older style building with a weird shop on the bottom, very similar to the first building I made. And I also made another bank right next to the first one with an off-centered sign and ATM because, you know, when you have a city, you need 2 banks directly next to each other. That is super necessary. Finally, in this offshoot, I made an area of the city that was still under construction with a crane and 2 unfinished buildings. After dinner, I moved to the other opposite end of the city that I needed to detail to match the expansion that I'd done. So to start off, I worked on finally detailing one of the first builds I'd made in the city. I'd also got some feedback from the city and was told that the city's park sucked. So I went and added some details to it to make it much better. And then I went back to building another building. After the terrible first graffiti, I wanted a second try at it, and sticking with this theme of self-promotion, I made my own logo, except it looked terrible, and it was like it was just slapped on the side of the building and slowly falling off. I want to mention that at this point, we are far beyond how long I usually spend working on a build. I try to space out my days so that I'm not playing Minecraft for the entire day straight, because that's terrible. But in this challenge, you do the opposite of that, so I was starting to really feel the effects right now. Anyways, moving on, I added 4 more buildings, including a restaurant with a little eating area outside, and 3 apartment buildings that look like exact copies of one another, and in all the primary colors. As I said, I was getting tired. FUD sign. Moving on, I decided that the city needed some public spaces, so I added a library. And since I made large glass windows once again, I needed to add interiors. Next, I added some more buildings surrounding the library and made the city look a lot bigger than it actually was.
Including 4 buildings that were just total facades and were just there to make the city look a lot bigger and more impressive without actually requiring too much work, because at this point I was really tired.
Finally, it was time to move on to some of the last little details that would really make this place stand out. I added a couple more buildings to one side of the city and then did some research to figure out what to add, and I found that all cities that show up on Google have this really tall building with a pointy top, or at least the first couple ones that show up. And being so tired and being 1 a.m. in the morning, I decided to build exactly that. Trying to use building tricks to make the building appear a lot bigger than it actually was. And finally, I went around and finished the tops off the building so that if you flew above them, the city would look more finished. That is 24 hours building one city.